I am 82 years old, and if there is one painful truth I have learned after living through 8 long decades of life, it is this: people rarely tell old people the truth. They stay silent. They smile politely. They nod their heads. They say things like, "You're fine," or "Don't worry about it." But deep inside, they slowly begin pulling away, not because of wrinkles, not because of gray hair, not because of slow walking or weak knees. No, people leave because of habits, ugly habits, habits that many elderly people don't even realize they have. And the saddest part is nobody wants to hurt an old person's feelings, so nobody says anything. They simply visit less, call less, sit for shorter periods, reply with dry messages, avoid conversations, and eventually disappear. I know this because I have seen it happen, not only to others, but to myself. There was a time when my grandchildren used to run into my arms the moment they saw me. Their laughter filled my small house like sunshine pouring through old windows. My daughter called me every evening. My son would stop by after work just to sit and drink tea beside me. Then something slowly changed. At first, I blamed the world. I said young people had become selfish. I said technology destroyed families. I said nobody respected elders anymore. But one evening, I sat alone in silence with only the ticking clock beside me, and for the first time in years, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if the problem is not only them? That question broke me, because wisdom does not always arrive gently. Sometimes wisdom arrives like a storm that tears the roof off your pride. And slowly, painfully, I began noticing things about myself that I had ignored for years. Things that pushed people away. Things I thought were harmless. Things nobody had the courage to tell me. Tonight, I want to speak honestly about those habits. Not to shame elderly people. Not to mock old age. Because growing old is already hard enough. But if we do not face the truth, loneliness will keep growing around us like cold winter fog. The first ugly habit is constant complaining. Now listen carefully. I am not talking about real pain. Old age comes with pain. The body hurts. Sleep changes. Friends die. Energy disappears. Life becomes quieter. Those struggles are real. But there is a difference between expressing pain and drowning every conversation in negativity. I remember sitting with my grandson years ago. He was only 14. He came excited to tell me about a basketball game he had won at school. His eyes were glowing with happiness. But before he could even finish his story, I interrupted him. My knees hurt all night. Doctors are useless. Nothing tastes good anymore. This world is terrible. I watched his smile slowly fade. At the time, I thought I was simply sharing my feelings. But now I realize something painful. Every conversation with me became emotionally heavy. People started preparing themselves before talking to me, the same way people prepare themselves before entering a storm. And eventually, they avoided the storm altogether. Young people already carry stress, bills, jobs, marriage problems, mental exhaustion, fear about the future. When every conversation with an older person becomes only complaints, guilt, sadness, and negativity, people slowly lose emotional energy. Not because they hate you, but because they are drowning too. One day my daughter said something softly that pierced my heart. "Dayade, every time I call you, I leave feeling sad." She was crying when she said it. That was the moment I understood. Pain shared with love creates connection. But constant negativity creates emotional exhaustion. The second ugly habit is criticizing everyone younger than you. This one is deadly. Many older people believe experience gives them permission to judge constantly. We were better back then. Your generation is lazy. Kids today have no manners. Marriage was stronger in our time. Women today are different. Men today are weak. I used to say these things often. I thought I sounded wise. In reality, I sounded bitter, and bitterness is exhausting to listen to. One afternoon, my granddaughter came to visit wearing ripped jeans and bright purple hair. I immediately judged her. "What kind of appearance is this? You look ridiculous." People will laugh at you." She became quiet for the rest of the visit. Later that night, I looked at an old photograph of myself from 1963. I was wearing clothes my own father hated. My hairstyle was considered rebellious in those days, and suddenly I laughed. Every generation shocks the older generation. That is life. Young people do not expect old people to understand everything, but they desperately hope to feel accepted. Criticism closes hearts. Curiosity opens them. Instead of saying, "Your music is terrible," we can ask, "What do you like about this song?" Instead of mocking their lifestyle, ask questions. You may not agree with everything, but respect keeps relationships alive. The third ugly habit is making every conversation about yourself. This habit hides quietly inside loneliness. When people age, they often feel invisible. So when someone finally listens, they talk endlessly about their own stories, pain, memories, illnesses, and opinions. I did this constantly. Someone would mention their vacation, and I would interrupt with my own story. Someone would talk about their problems, and somehow the conversation would return to me. I wasn't trying to be selfish. I was trying to feel important again. But there is a painful truth about conversation. People do not only want to be heard, they want to feel seen. And when elderly people dominate every discussion, younger people slowly stop sharing their lives. I remember the exact moment I realized this. My son visited me after a difficult week at work. I could see stress all over his face. But before he could speak, I spent 40 straight minutes talking about my medications, my neighbor, politics, and old memories. Finally, he looked at the clock and quietly said, "I should go." After he left, I realized something horrible. I never once asked him if he was okay. Not once. Old age can accidentally make us self-centered because our world becomes smaller. Pain becomes louder. Loneliness becomes heavier. But relationships survive through mutual care, not one-sided emotional dumping. The fourth ugly habit is refusing to adapt. Some elderly people wear stubbornness like a crown. They refuse new technology, refuse new ideas, refuse changing times, refuse learning. Then they become angry when they feel disconnected. I used to say, "I'm too old for smartphones. I don't need to learn these things." In my time, things were simpler. But deep inside, I wasn't refusing technology. I was refusing discomfort. And that refusal slowly isolated me from the people I loved. My grandchildren communicated through messages, photos, and video calls. Entire family memories existed online. Birthdays were shared digitally. Family groups laughed together every day. And I stood outside that world complaining nobody included me. But the truth was painful. I refused to enter their world. One day my granddaughter patiently taught me how to video call. I felt embarrassed like a child learning to walk again. But when I finally saw my great-grandson's tiny face smiling through the screen from another state, I cried. Not because of technology, but because I almost allowed pride to steal connection. Aging does not mean stopping growth. The moment we stop learning, we begin disappearing emotionally from the world around us. And sometimes the people avoiding us are not rejecting our age. They are exhausted by our resistance. Growing old is not the tragedy. Becoming emotionally unreachable is the tragedy. And sadly, many people never realize it until the room becomes silent, the phone stops ringing, and loneliness settles into the house like permanent winter. But there are still more habits, more hidden behaviors, more painful truths nobody says aloud. And sometimes the habits we believe protect our dignity are the very things destroying our relationships quietly from the inside. At this age, silence teaches you things that noise never could. When you are young, life is loud. Children running through the house, phones ringing, work schedules, family dinners, neighbors knocking on the door, friends calling unexpectedly. There is movement everywhere. But when you grow old, life becomes quieter, painfully quieter. And in that silence, you begin noticing something terrifying. Not everyone who leaves your life leaves suddenly. Most people leave slowly, one canceled visit at a time, one shorter phone call at a time, one less conversation at a time, until one day you sit in your chair staring at the door wondering why nobody comes anymore. For years, I blamed the world for this loneliness. But eventually, I realized something painful. Sometimes people do not leave because they stopped loving us. Sometimes they leave because being around us became emotionally difficult. There are habits that quietly push people away, even when they still care about you deeply. And one of the ugliest habits in old age is becoming impossible to please. I used to do this without realizing it. If my daughter cooked dinner for me, I complained it had too much salt. If my son bought me a sweater, I criticized the color. If someone visited me, I complained they came too late. If they called me, I complained they did not call long enough. Nothing was ever enough. At the time, I thought I was simply being honest, but honesty without gratitude becomes emotional poison. One winter evening, my grandson drove nearly 2 hours through heavy rain just to visit me after work. He looked exhausted when he arrived. But instead of thanking him, the first thing I said was, "You should have come earlier." I still remember the look on his face. Not anger, not disrespect, just disappointment. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. I had trained people to feel guilty, no matter what they did for me. No human being can survive long in a relationship where every effort feels unappreciated. People naturally move toward warmth and away from emotional coldness. Gratitude matters more in old age than almost anything else, because when people feel appreciated, they return willingly. But when they feel judged, no matter how hard they try, visits begin to feel like obligations instead of love. The next ugly habit is using guilt as emotional control. This one destroys families quietly. Many elderly people do this without even noticing. "We sacrificed everything for you. You never spend time with me anymore. One day I'll die and then you'll regret it. Nobody cares about old people. I guess I'm just a burden now." These sentences sound emotional, but they are often weapons disguised as sadness, and emotional guilt slowly suffocates relationships. I remember calling my daughter one night after she canceled a visit because her child was sick. Instead of understanding, I said, "Well, maybe your old father just doesn't matter anymore." There was silence on the phone. Long silence. Then she quietly whispered, "Dad, I'm trying my best." That sentence broke me. Because for the first time, I stopped seeing myself as the victim and saw her exhaustion too. Middle-aged adults today are carrying enormous pressure: jobs, children, bills, mental stress, marriage struggles, health problems. Many are barely surviving emotionally, and when elderly parents add guilt on top of that pressure, love slowly turns into anxiety. Then something tragic happens. People begin avoiding contact, not because they do not care, but because every interaction leaves them emotionally drained. Love cannot breathe under constant guilt. The truth is, nobody wants to feel emotionally punished every time they cannot meet our expectations. Another ugly habit is refusing to listen. This one is more dangerous than people realize. Some older people only want to speak, advise, lecture, or correct, but conversations are not speeches. They are emotional exchanges. I used to interrupt constantly. My grandson would talk about anxiety, and I would say, "Young people are too sensitive." My daughter would explain her stress, and I would answer, "You don't know what real hardship is." My son would discuss modern parenting struggles, and I would immediately compare everything to the past. I thought I was giving wisdom, but wisdom that refuses to listen first becomes arrogance. Young people today are fighting battles many elderly people never experienced: social media pressure, mental health struggles, economic fear, loneliness despite constant online connection, a world changing faster than the human heart can adapt. Whether we fully understand those struggles or not, dismissing them damages trust. One day, my granddaughter stopped talking halfway through a conversation and said something I will never forget. "You never really hear me." That sentence echoed in my chest for weeks. Because she was right. I listened only long enough to prepare my own opinion, not to understand her heart, and people can feel the difference. Real listening is one of the greatest forms of love, especially in old age, because when elderly people stop listening, younger generations stop opening their hearts. Another ugly habit that drives people away is becoming overly controlling. Old age can create fear. Fear of losing independence. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of change. Fear of being forgotten. And sometimes that fear transforms into control. I started doing this after my wife passed away. I tried controlling everything around me. How my children raised their kids. How family gatherings were organized. What people should wear. What they should eat. How they should spend money. I interfered constantly. I told myself I was helping, but the truth was uglier. I was trying to control others because I no longer felt control over my own aging life. And control suffocates relationships. One afternoon, my son finally lost patience. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Dead every time we visit. It feels like we are being inspected instead of loved." That sentence shattered something inside me, because suddenly I understood why family gatherings felt tense. People were not relaxing around me. They were performing around me, trying not to upset me, trying not to trigger criticism, trying not to hear another lecture. Home should feel emotionally safe, not emotionally exhausting. The next ugly habit is constantly talking about death in manipulative ways. Now listen carefully. Talking honestly about aging and mortality is normal. Old people think about death more often because we know time is limited. But there is a difference between honest reflection and emotional manipulation. Some elderly people repeatedly say things like, "I'll probably be dead soon anyway. This may be my last birthday. You'll miss me when I'm gone." I use these sentences often after losing old friends. Part of me wanted reassurance. Part of me wanted attention. Part of me wanted proof that I still mattered. But eventually I noticed something heartbreaking. Every conversation became emotionally heavy. People began entering my house already tense, wondering if today would become another emotional funeral speech. Nobody can emotionally survive constant exposure to fear, guilt, and sadness forever. Even love needs moments of lightness to survive. One day my little great-grandson visited me. He was only 6 years old. I jokingly said, "Well, maybe this old grandpa won't be here next year." The child looked terrified. Later, my granddaughter pulled me aside and gently said, "Please don't say things like that around him." At first, I felt offended. Then I realized something painful. I had become so consumed by my own fear of aging that I was spreading emotional fear into the hearts of others. That is not wisdom. That is emotional leakage. And perhaps the saddest ugly habit of all is becoming emotionally stuck in the past. Old memories are beautiful. They matter. They shape us. They keep loved ones alive inside our hearts. But some elderly people live so deeply in yesterday that they stop participating in today. I almost became one of them. I compared everything to the past. The old days were better. People were kinder. Families were stronger. Music had meaning. Life made sense back then. But eventually I noticed something. The more I worshipped the past, the more disconnected I became from the present. Young people stopped sharing new experiences with me because I rejected everything modern automatically. And slowly I became emotionally frozen in another era while life continued moving without me. One evening, I sat alone holding an old photograph of my wife. I cried for a long time, not only because I missed her, but because I realized something painful. I had spent years mourning life instead of living what remained of it. And perhaps that is one of the greatest dangers in old age. Not wrinkles, not weakness, not gray hair, but becoming emotionally trapped in a world that no longer exists. Because when we stop participating in the present, people slowly stop bringing the present to us, and loneliness grows quietly, like dust settling over forgotten furniture. But the hardest habits to admit are still coming, because some behaviors do not just push strangers away. They slowly wound the very people who once loved us most deeply. And if age has taught me anything, it is this: loneliness rarely arrives all at once. It arrives quietly, like rain leaking through a roof, one drop at a time. At first, you barely notice it. A missed phone call, a delayed visit, a shorter conversation, a birthday with fewer people around the table. Then one day you wake up and realize the house has become too quiet. And the terrifying part is that many elderly people never understand why it happened. They think, my family changed. Nobody respects old people anymore. Children become selfish when they grow up. Sometimes that is true, but sometimes the truth is far more painful. Sometimes the elderly unknowingly create emotional wounds that slowly push people away. Not through cruelty, but through habits. Habits nobody dares to confront because society teaches younger people to stay polite around elders, even when they are hurting. One of the ugliest habits in old age is turning every interaction into criticism, disguised as advice. This one is dangerous because older people often believe they are helping. I certainly did. Whenever my son talked about parenting, I corrected him. Whenever my daughter discussed her marriage, I gave unwanted opinions. Whenever my grandchildren made choices I did not understand, I immediately pointed out flaws. I called it wisdom, but wisdom without humility becomes control. One Thanksgiving dinner, my granddaughter proudly announced she wanted to become an artist instead of studying law like her parents hoped. The room became quiet, and without thinking, I laughed softly and said, "You'll never survive in life doing that." I still remember her face. The excitement disappeared instantly. Her eyes lowered to the table. She barely spoke for the rest of the evening. Months later, my daughter told me something painful. She stopped sharing her dreams around you because she feels judged. That sentence haunted me, because I realized something heartbreaking. Many older people unintentionally become dream killers, not because they are evil, but because fear speaks louder than encouragement. Older generations survived through caution. Hardship taught us to expect disappointment. We learned to avoid risk because survival demanded it. But younger generations do not need constant fear from us. They need emotional safety. Sometimes the greatest gift an elder can offer is not advice, but belief. The next ugly habit is comparing children or grandchildren against each other. This destroys families more deeply than most elderly people realize. I grew up in a generation where comparison was normal. Your brother works harder. Your cousin is more successful. Why can't you be more like her? I repeated these same patterns without noticing. I praised one grandchild constantly because he became a doctor. Meanwhile, another grandson struggled through life working ordinary jobs and trying to find his place. I thought I was motivating him. But one afternoon, he finally spoke honestly. "No matter what I do, I'll never be enough for you." His voice cracked when he said it. That moment crushed me, because I suddenly realized I had measured human worth through achievement instead of heart. Some children succeed loudly. Others love quietly. Some become wealthy. Others become kind. Both matter, but comparison creates invisible scars. Families are not competitions, and when elderly people constantly compare relatives, resentment grows beneath the surface for years. Another ugly habit is refusing to apologize. This one is enormous. Many elderly people come from generations where authority mattered more than emotional honesty. Parents were rarely expected to apologize. Elders believed admitting mistakes weakened respect. I lived most of my life this way. Even when I knew I hurt someone, pride kept my mouth shut. I told myself, they should understand. I'm older. I didn't mean it that way. But intent does not erase pain. One of the most painful memories of my life happened after an argument with my daughter. She had been caring for me constantly after a surgery. She drove me to appointments, cooked meals, handled medications, and balanced her own family responsibilities at the same time. One evening, she forgot to pick up one prescription because she was exhausted, and I exploded. I accused her of not caring. I raised my voice. I said terrible things I cannot take back. She stood silently while tears filled her eyes. Then she whispered, "I'm trying so hard. Dad?" And she walked out. For weeks, pride stopped me from apologizing. But during those lonely nights, I kept replaying the moment in my mind. Finally, I called her and said the words that older people sometimes fear most. I was wrong. There was silence. Then she started crying, and so did I. Do you know what I learned that day? Apologies do not weaken dignity. They restore love. The next ugly habit is expecting constant attention while ignoring other people's lives. This truth hurts deeply, because old age can feel incredibly lonely. After retirement, after losing friends, after children move away, elderly people often begin depending emotionally on family for most of their connection. I became this way after my wife died. My loneliness was unbearable, so I expected my children to fill every emotional gap inside me. If they were busy, I felt rejected. If they delayed replying, I felt abandoned. If they spent time elsewhere, I felt forgotten. But eventually I realized something difficult. Love does not mean people can revolve entirely around us. My children loved me deeply, but they also had lives, career stress, health issues, bills, exhaustion, and I was unintentionally demanding emotional energy they no longer had. One evening, my son visited after working a 12-hour shift. He looked completely drained. Instead of asking how he felt, I immediately complained. "You never come enough." I watched his shoulders sink. That image still hurts me, because exhausted people cannot endlessly carry emotional guilt. Even family love has limits when it is built only on obligation. Healthy relationships require emotional balance, not emotional dependency. Another ugly habit is turning bitterness into personality. This happens slowly. Life wounds older people deeply. Friends die, bodies weaken, dreams disappear, regrets grow louder at night. The world changes too quickly. And if pain is not processed carefully, bitterness begins taking over the soul. I almost lost myself to bitterness after turning 75. I criticized everything, mocked happiness, distrusted kindness, assumed negative intentions, complained constantly about society, family, and change. I thought I was becoming wise. In reality, I was becoming emotionally toxic. Bitterness spreads quietly, like smoke filling a room. People feel it immediately, even if nobody says anything aloud. I remember sitting at a family dinner watching everyone laugh together while I sat silently judging everything around me. Suddenly, I noticed something terrifying. Nobody looked relaxed around me anymore. They were careful with words, careful with jokes, careful with opinions, not because they respected me, but because my negativity made everyone emotionally tense. That realization broke my heart, because I had become the kind of elder I once feared becoming myself. A person who drains life instead of adding warmth to it. And perhaps one of the saddest ugly habits is refusing emotional growth simply because of age. Some elderly people say, "This is just how I am. I'm too old to change. People should accept me as I am." I used those exact words for years. But age does not excuse harmful behavior. In fact, age should deepen wisdom, and true wisdom includes self-awareness. One afternoon, I visited an old friend from my youth. He was 90 years old and still full of warmth. His children adored him. His grandchildren fought for time with him. I asked him his secret. He smiled gently and said, "I never stopped trying to become easier to love." That sentence changed me forever, because many elderly people focus only on being respected. But they forget something equally important: being emotionally safe to be around. People naturally move toward warmth, toward understanding, toward peace, toward kindness, not perfection, just kindness. And as I grew older, I finally understood something heartbreaking. Many lonely elderly people are not abandoned because of age alone. They are isolated because years of unchecked habits, slowly built emotional walls around them. Walls made of criticism, pride, negativity, control, bitterness, guilt, and eventually, even the people who love them become exhausted trying to climb those walls. But the most painful truths are still ahead, because some habits do not only push people away from us, they slowly destroy our own inner peace too. And there is something nobody warns you about when you are young. Aging is not only physical, it is emotional. Your body changes, yes. Your strength weakens, yes. But the real battle of old age happens quietly inside the mind and heart, because when life slows down, you are finally left alone with yourself, your memories, your bitterness, your fears, your habits. And if you are not careful, those inner storms begin spilling onto everyone around you. That is why some elderly people become deeply loved in old age, while others become painfully isolated. Not because of money, not because of appearance, not because of status, but because of emotional energy. People remember how you make them feel, even more than what you say. And one ugly habit that silently destroys both relationships and inner peace is holding on to grudges for too long. I carried grudges almost my entire life. Against relatives, against old friends, against people who insulted me decades earlier, against family members who disappointed me. At first, it felt justified. I told myself, they hurt me. They were wrong. They should apologize first. But anger ages the soul faster than wrinkles age the face. And the worst part is this. Most people who hurt you continue living normally, while you carry the poison inside your own chest for years. I learned this lesson after refusing to speak to my younger brother for almost 11 years. 11 years. Can you imagine that? Two old men growing older in silence because of pride. The argument itself was foolish now that I look back on it. It involved money after our father passed away. Harsh words were spoken. Ego took control. Neither of us wanted to surrender. Years passed. Birthdays ignored. Family gatherings divided. Phone calls never made. Then one morning, my nephew called me crying. My brother had suffered a stroke. I rushed to the hospital trembling inside. When I entered the room, he looked smaller than I remembered. Weak, fragile, human. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he grabbed my hand and whispered. We wasted so much time. I broke down crying beside his bed, because suddenly I understood something devastating. Pride steals years that can never be returned, and many elderly people become trapped in emotional prisons built from old pain. They replay betrayals over and over until bitterness becomes part of their identity. But forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes forgiveness is survival. Another ugly habit is constantly expecting disappointment. This one is dangerous because it slowly turns suspiciousness into personality. After enough heartbreak, many older people stop trusting joy. They assume every promise will fail. Every relationship will disappoint. Every act of kindness has hidden motives. I became this way after losing several close friends and watching family conflicts tear people apart over the years. Slowly, I stopped expecting good things. When someone offered help, I doubted them. When family visited, I questioned their intentions. When someone showed kindness, I assumed it would not last. And eventually, people felt my distrust, because human beings can sense when their love is being questioned constantly. One afternoon, my granddaughter surprised me with a homemade cake for my birthday. Instead of simply appreciating her effort, I immediately said, "You probably bought this from a store." The hurt in her eyes hit me instantly. She had spent hours making it herself, but my suspicious mindset had become automatic. That night I sat alone thinking about how pain had changed me, not only emotionally, but spiritually. I had stopped receiving love openly because fear convinced me disappointment was safer than hope. And sadly, many elderly people live this way without realizing it. They protect themselves so heavily from future pain that they also block future joy. Another ugly habit is talking endlessly about sickness and suffering. Now please understand me carefully. Health struggles in old age are real. Pain is real. Fear is real, but when illness becomes the center of every conversation, relationships slowly become emotionally exhausting. I know this because I did it constantly. Every phone call became a medical report. Every visit became a discussion about medications, symptoms, doctors, pain, surgeries, or death. I thought people would understand my suffering. But eventually I noticed something heartbreaking. The moment conversations turned toward health complaints, the energy in the room changed. Faces became tense. Conversations became shorter. Visits ended earlier. Not because people lacked compassion, but because endless negativity drains emotional strength. One day, my grandson visited me after months away at college. He came excited, full of stories, energy, and life. But within minutes, I redirected everything back toward my health problems. After about 30 minutes, he quietly stopped sharing. And suddenly I realized something painful. Young people bring life into our homes. But sometimes we bury that life under endless heaviness. Balance matters. Honesty matters. But so does emotional lightness. Some elderly people unknowingly become emotional black holes where all joy disappears the moment they enter a conversation. And eventually, people begin protecting their own emotional peace by staying away. Another ugly habit is refusing to let younger people live differently. This one quietly destroys family closeness. Many older people confuse love with control. They believe, if you love someone, you must guide every choice they make. But guidance becomes toxic when it leaves no room for individuality. I struggled terribly with this. I wanted my children to live the way I believed was correct. I wanted traditions preserved exactly. I wanted routines followed. I wanted decisions approved by me. But life does not belong to us forever. Children grow into adults. Grandchildren create new cultures. The world evolves. And love must evolve too. One evening, my granddaughter told me she planned to move to another state for work. I reacted terribly. I accused her of abandoning family. I criticized her priorities. I made her feel guilty for wanting independence. She cried during that conversation. Months later, I realized my fear had disguised itself as love. The truth was simple. I was afraid of being left behind, and fear often makes elderly people emotionally controlling without realizing it. But love cannot survive where freedom disappears. The next ugly habit is believing respect only flows one way. Older generations were often taught, younger people must respect elders no matter what. But true respect cannot survive without mutual dignity. Age deserves honor. Yes, but younger people are human beings too. They deserve kindness, patience, listening, understanding. I failed to understand this for many years. I believed being older automatically made my opinions more valuable. Then one night, my grandson said something quietly during dinner that changed me forever. "Grandpa, sometimes you demand respect without giving it." The room became silent. At first I felt insulted, but later alone in bed, his words replayed in my mind again and again. And painfully I realized he was right. I interrupted people constantly, dismissed younger opinions quickly, expected patience while offering little patience in return. That is not wisdom. Wisdom should create humility, not superiority. And perhaps the saddest, ugly habit of all is losing curiosity about life itself. This happens slowly in old age. People stop trying new things, stop asking questions, stop exploring, stop laughing deeply, stop growing emotionally. They survive, but they stop living. I almost became one of those people. Every day became identical. Wake up, complain, watch television, repeat old stories, sleep. My spirit was shrinking. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. My great-grandson asked me to help him plant flowers outside. At first, I refused. My back hurts. I'm too old. Maybe another day. But he grabbed my hand and smiled. So I went. And as we planted tiny flowers into the soil together, I suddenly felt something I had not felt in years. Life. Simple, quiet life. The smell of dirt. The sound of birds. A child laughing beside me. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Old age does not only require medicine for the body, It requires nourishment for the soul, curiosity, connection, purpose, warmth. Without those things, elderly people slowly become emotionally hollow. And when the soul becomes hollow, bitterness rushes in to fill the empty space. But there is still one final truth left to face, because the greatest danger in old age is not loneliness itself. It is becoming the kind of person who unknowingly creates it. And tonight, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me many years ago. Old age does not automatically make a person wise. It simply reveals who they have been becoming their entire life. Some people grow older and become softer, kinder, gentler, more understanding, and others become harder, more bitter, more controlling, more negative, more emotionally difficult to love. The frightening part is that most people never notice the change happening inside themselves. I almost didn't. For a long time, I thought loneliness was simply part of aging. I thought all old people eventually became forgotten. But now, after living through decades of mistakes, heartbreak, pride, regret, and reflection, I understand something differently. People do not avoid old age. They avoid emotional heaviness. They avoid criticism, constant negativity, manipulation, bitterness, control, endless complaining, pride that refuses growth, and sadly, many elderly people unknowingly become trapped inside those habits while still wondering why the world feels distant. I know because I nearly lost the people I loved most. There was a season in my life when my home became painfully quiet. Days passed without phone calls. Family visits became shorter. Conversations felt forced. At first, I blamed everyone else. But eventually, I gathered enough courage to look honestly at myself. And that honesty changed my life. Not instantly, but slowly. Like sunrise entering a dark room little by little. I began trying to listen more instead of lecture. Thank people more instead of criticizing. Encourage more instead of controlling. Smile more instead of complaining. At first, it felt strange. After decades of certain habits, change feels uncomfortable. But something beautiful slowly started happening. My grandchildren relaxed around me again. My daughter called more often. My son stayed longer after dinner instead of rushing home. Not because I became perfect, but because I became emotionally safer to be around. That is what many elderly people fail to understand. People are not searching for perfection. They are searching for peace. One of the biggest lies old age tells us is, "You are too old to change." That is false. As long as the heart is beating, growth is still possible. I once met a man in a nursing home who completely transformed the way I viewed aging. He was 91 years old, thin, weak, walking slowly with a cane. But when he entered a room, people smiled immediately. Nurses loved him. Visitors gathered around him. Even lonely residents seemed happier near him. One day I asked him, "What is your secret?" He smiled gently and answered, "I stopped trying to be the most important person in the room. I started trying to be the warmest." I never forgot those words, because warmth matters, more than status, more than authority, more than being right all the time. Warmth keeps families connected. Warmth makes grandchildren want to visit. Warmth turns old age from something heavy into something comforting. And warmth comes from small things. Saying, "How are you really doing?" Listening without interrupting. Laughing at yourself sometimes. Allowing younger people to live differently without attacking them. Showing gratitude for simple efforts. Apologizing when necessary. Remaining curious about life. These things sound small, but emotionally they change everything. Another truth I learned too late is this: younger generations are struggling more than many elderly people realize. The world they inherited moves incredibly fast. People are mentally exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, financially pressured, lonely in ways previous generations never experienced. Many young adults are silently fighting anxiety, burnout, depression, fear, and emotional isolation while still trying to survive daily responsibilities. So when elderly people add constant criticism, guilt, negativity, or emotional pressure on top of that burden, relationships begin collapsing quietly. not from lack of love, but from emotional exhaustion. Sometimes your children love you deeply and are simply tired. Sometimes your grandchildren care about you, but feel emotionally judged around you. Sometimes people avoid visiting not because they hate you, but because every interaction feels heavy. That truth hurts. But truth that hurts can also heal, because once we become aware, we can change. I started changing through very small actions. When my grandson visited, I stopped turning every conversation toward my health problems. Instead, I asked about his dreams. When my daughter made mistakes, I stopped criticizing immediately. Instead, I thanked her for trying. When younger people spoke about modern struggles I did not fully understand, I stopped dismissing them. Instead, I listened, and little by little, relationships softened again. Do you know something beautiful about human hearts? Most people are incredibly forgiving when they feel genuine effort. They do not need perfection. They simply need to feel emotionally safe, respected, and appreciated. One evening, my granddaughter hugged me before leaving after dinner and whispered, "You feel different now, Grandpa." I asked her, "Different how?" She smiled softly and said, "Peaceful." That word touched me deeply, because for many years I was not peaceful. I was wounded, defensive, fearful of aging, fearful of irrelevance, fearful of being forgotten, and fear had transformed into negativity without me realizing it. That is what many ugly habits truly are. Unhealed fear wearing different masks. Control often hides fear. Bitterness often hides grief. Constant criticism often hides disappointment. Complaining often hides loneliness. Once I understood this, I stopped asking, "Why are old people so difficult sometimes?" and started asking, "What pain are they carrying that they never healed?" That question changed the way I viewed both myself and others, because many elderly people are not trying to hurt anyone. They are hurting inside themselves. But pain that remains unhealed eventually spills onto everyone nearby. And that is why emotional healing matters even in old age. Maybe especially in old age. Because the final years of life should not only be about surviving physically, they should be about becoming lighter emotionally, more forgiving, more loving, more peaceful, more grateful, not only for others, but for ourselves too. I know many people watching this are elderly themselves, and maybe some of these truths hurt. Maybe you recognize parts of yourself in these habits. If so, do not feel shame. Awareness is not punishment. Awareness is opportunity. The moment we recognize harmful patterns, we regain the power to change them. And if you are younger listening to this, please remember something important too. Old people are human beings carrying entire lifetimes inside them, regrets, losses, dreams that never happened, friends buried long ago, a world that changed faster than they could emotionally process. Sometimes their difficult behavior comes from pain they never learned how to express properly. That does not excuse harmful habits, but it does invite compassion, because one day, if life is kind enough, all of us will grow old too. And perhaps the greatest goal of aging is not simply living longer, but remaining lovable, remaining emotionally warm, remaining someone whose presence brings comfort instead of tension. At 82 years old, I finally understand this now. People may forget your career, your money, your achievements, but they will never forget how they felt around you, whether your presence felt heavy or peaceful, cold or comforting, draining or loving. And before my time finally comes, I hope to leave behind something more valuable than possessions. I hope to leave behind warmth, because in the end, the elders most deeply loved are rarely the strongest, richest, or smartest. They are the ones who made others feel safe, seen, valued, and loved. And perhaps that is the true secret to growing old without growing alone. And tonight, before this conversation ends, I want to leave you with one final truth from the deepest part of my heart. Growing old is not easy. People see the wrinkles, the gray hair, the slow walking, the shaking hands, but they do not see the invisible battles, the memories that keep us awake at night, the fear of becoming forgotten, the pain of watching the world move on without us, the silence after loved ones are gone, the loneliness that sometimes sits beside us like an unwanted shadow. Old age humbles a human being. You begin life believing you are strong forever. Then one day, you realize time slowly takes everything: your speed, your energy, your beauty, your friends, sometimes even your confidence. And in that painful process, something dangerous can happen. If we are not careful, pain slowly hardens the heart. That is where many ugly habits begin, not from evil, but from unhealed sadness. A lonely person may become controlling because they fear abandonment. A hurting person may criticize constantly because bitterness has taken root inside them. A fearful person may complain endlessly because negativity becomes their only language. A proud person may refuse to apologize because they are terrified of feeling weak. Behind many difficult elderly people is simply a wounded human being who never learned how to heal properly. And perhaps that is why this topic matters so much. Because loneliness in old age is not always caused by society alone. Sometimes it is built slowly through habits, words, attitudes, and emotional patterns repeated over many years. Habits that push away the very people we love most. But here is the beautiful truth. As long as we are alive, change is still possible, no matter your age. At 50, at 70, at 82, even at 90, the heart can still soften. You can still become more patient, more understanding, more grateful, more peaceful. You can still choose warmth over bitterness. And sometimes the smallest emotional changes create the biggest miracles in relationships. A softer tone, a sincere apology, a listening ear, a grateful heart, a gentle response instead of criticism. These things sound simple, but they heal families. I learned this late in life, later than I wish I had. I spent too many years believing respect mattered more than kindness. Too many years believing being right mattered more than making people feel loved. Too many years protecting my pride while unintentionally hurting the people closest to me. And if I could go back in time, there are many moments I would change. I would hug more, judge less, listen longer, laugh louder, forgive faster. I would stop treating vulnerability like weakness. Because in the final stage of life, something becomes very clear. Nobody remembers how many arguments you won. They remember how your presence made them feel, whether people felt safe around you, comforted by you, accepted by you, or emotionally exhausted by you. That is the real legacy of a human being. Not wealth, not status, not power. Emotional impact. And maybe that is why the most beautiful elderly people are not always the healthiest or richest ones. They are the warm ones, the ones who smile gently, the ones who make grandchildren feel heard, the ones who bless others with peace instead of pressure, the ones who still carry kindness despite everything life did to them. Those people become unforgettable, not because they demanded love, but because they created it naturally. And to every elderly person listening to me tonight, please hear this carefully. You are not useless because you are aging. You are not invisible because your body is changing. You are not unworthy of love because the world moves faster now. Your value still exists. Your wisdom still matters. Your presence still has power. But emotional growth must continue until the very end of life. Do not let pride steal your relationships. Do not let bitterness poison your final years. Do not let loneliness turn into emotional cruelty. And most importantly, do not stop becoming kinder, because kindness is what keeps the soul alive even when the body grows weak. And to the younger people listening, please be patient with the elderly too. Many of them grew up in harder emotional environments where feelings were buried instead of discussed. Many carry pain they never had the words to explain. Some are difficult not because they lack love, but because life made them emotionally defensive. Try to understand them when possible. Listen to their stories sometimes. Sit beside them a little longer. One day, if life allows it, you will stand where they stand now. And suddenly, you will understand things you could never fully understand while young. That time moves frighteningly fast. That loneliness can feel heavy. That memories become both treasures and wounds. And that human beings never stop needing love, no matter how old they become. At 82 years old, I have learned that aging beautifully has very little to do with appearance. It has everything to do with emotional softness. The people who age beautifully are the ones who remain gentle after hardship, grateful after disappointment, loving after loss. They refuse to let pain transform them into bitterness. And that may be one of the greatest victories a human being can achieve, because life will wound all of us eventually, but we still choose what kind of presence we become afterward: heavy or healing, cold or comforting, bitter or wise. And before my journey ends someday, I pray for only one thing now. Not wealth, not fame, not more years, just this: that the people I love will feel peace when they remember me. Because in the end, that is what truly matters. Not how long we lived, but how deeply we loved while we were here.